This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for watching this week's NC Spin. We've got a full show for you that begins by analyzing the surprising results from Tuesday's special primary election in the 9th Congressional District. And we talk about the firing of our elections director. We ask why families earning $70,000 a year should qualify to receive a voucher to send their child to private school. And we discuss whether or not it's time to kill the death penalty in our state. And as always, we ask our panel to tell us something we don't know. Joining this week's panel are Tamara Barringer, former state senator, John Hood, syndicated columnist and author, Chris Fitzsimon, director of the Newsroom, and Rufus Edmisten, former Secretary of State, former Attorney General, and new author. As a matter of fact, I have just had placed in my hands one of the first off-the-press copies of Rufus's new book, and it's called That's Rufus.
Now, never mind that the picture's 50 years old.
I was going to say, you look a little different there.
But we will have a book signing on the 30th of May at the Museum of History.
In Raleigh.
In Raleigh. And everybody's welcome. It doesn't cost you anything. If you buy a book, it might cost you a little bit something. But all the proceeds go to the Super Kids Fund.
And each of the copies of the books are $32.95, and the panel gets half of that. Is that the way this works?
That's sort of that works.
May 30th, Museum of History. I can't wait to read it because Rufus tells us it's got plenty of stuff about us here on NC Spin and also about Mike Raley and Weekend Gardener on WPTF. Well, we'll begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages from our underwriters.
Our state has more than 300,000 with no options for health insurance. 63% are in working families, one illness away from disaster. Let's create a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured.
To learn more, visit careforcarolina.com.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
Partners for Innovation in Healthcare. We're supporting common sense solutions for North Carolina's healthcare delivery system, promoting access, affordability, quality care, and innovation. Visit us on the web at pihc.info.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Let's get started. People along our southern border came a step closer to having a congressional representative after Tuesday's 9th District special primary election. There were 10 Republicans running, and the big question in most minds was whether one of them could get the 30% of the vote that would be necessary to avoid having to have a runoff. Rufus, we got an emphatic answer to that question as Dan Bishop captured almost 48% of the votes. Stoney Rushing came in second with 19%, but polls had indicated Bishop might be the front runner. How do you explain this big margin?
Well, Tom, he has been in the state assembly for quite some time. And secondly, he's from a big county. And thirdly, this is sort of a wacky idea, but I believe the introduction of H.R. 2 put his name out there so much that it was a household word. And whether we want to accept it or not or believe it, there's still a lot of right-wing Republicans who love the idea that he put the bill in on the same-sex bathroom stuff, the bathroom bill. And I think that catapulted him into a higher level that nobody could catch him.
Tamara, it was really interesting because there were only 31,000 votes. There was only a roughly 9.5% turnout here. Of that, roughly 78% of the vote came from two counties, Union and Mecklenburg counties. The rest of the counties obviously are not quite as populated, but this was a huge percentage of victory, wouldn't you say?
Well, yes, it is. And I will tell you my view about the poll is that a poll is only as good as the filters you use for likely voting. And the folks that they talked to weren't the likely voters. And so that's why his poll numbers were lower than the reality when the vote actually happened.
Well, that is certainly possible, but it's also important to remember that if you take the polls were accurate. The polls ahead of the election were roughly correct. They somewhat understated his support, but not by very much. Because, of course, if you poll and say he's 31% with 30% undecided, the undecided don't count.
Go somewhere.
They're either going to vote or they're going to drop out. So if you take them out of the mix, the polls were predicting that Dan would get somewhere in the 40s.
And that's my point. That's my point. They were, that 30% were not likely voters.
Or they were going to break roughly the way the committed voters had.
Or they didn't want to give people an answer, because there's a certain amount of that too. Chris, we're looking at this 10% turnout. That's roughly what they had in 2018 for the election there. Down in the 3rd district, though, they had 15% turnout for that election down there. Was there greater interest there? Was there less interest in?
I don't know. I mean, obviously there was less interest if fewer people showed up, but I do think there were more candidates who had a credible chance, who spent more money. It felt like there was more activity by more people in the 3rd district, but that doesn't mean that you mentioned it was Union in Mecklenburg County. I do think that's one of the biggest factors in this election is that Dan Bishop is from Charlotte.
There were more Republican votes in the 3rd than the 9th, but the turnout is largely about the fact that in the 3rd they had a Democratic primary, and in the 9th they did not.
You wrote a column about that this week, and you pointed that out, and that was I was hoping.
And I think the Walter Jones seat had a lot to do with it, because people can remember that seat had been in the Jones family for a long time.
Tamara, the realtors spent more than $1,300,000 on Lee Brown's, in support of Lee Brown. She only got 2,600 votes. Now, my math shows that's $500 a vote. That's a lot of money to spend for that many votes, or that few votes. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, sure.
What does it say about the influence of money in electoral turnouts?
Well, there's certainly some influence in that respect, but when you have voters who educate themselves and look at the candidates, then the money can be overcome, and that's what happened here.
Chris, the gloves came off the day after the election. As soon as everybody knew what the totals were, the gloves came off. And all of a sudden, both candidates, to a certain extent, came out swinging. They're trying to frame each other. Dan Bishop is framing Dan McCready with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Nancy Pelosi and the devil and just about every socialist you can name.
Yeah, well, two things about that. One is it's interesting that people claim the whole Democratic Party endorses one or two freshman Republicans when Steve King of Iowa was banned from serving on committees because he appears to be a white supremacist, and that doesn't brand the whole Republican Party. But here's the thing I really thought was interesting. Have you ever seen a candidate the day after a primary take a cardboard cutout to his opponent's office? That's like something that Dallas Woodhouse would have done when he was at Americans for Prosperity or Progress NC. That's like a stunt that an advocacy group would do. And here you have a candidate who wants to be taken seriously, literally taking a cutout, a life-size cutout of his opponent to his office and having a press event, which I thought was beneath the dignity of the race and the office.
I'm going to have to give Dallas your cell phone number. So far as it goes, Bishop is trying to frame McCready as being a socialist. On the other hand, McCready and the Democrats are going to hang this Bathroom Dan moniker on Bishop, hoping that it's going to have some leverage and try to position him as an ultra right wing.
Right. I think that whatever people think about that issue, that is an issue in the rearview mirror, and the election will probably be more about the conflict between President Trump and the Democrats in Congress. I think that's the way it'll be framed, much more than the HB2 controversy from some years ago. Obviously, there are plenty of people who have strong feelings about it on either side. I just don't think it's going to determine the outcome of this election.
All right, so Rufus, the winner in the September 10th general election is going to go up to Washington, going to get sworn in, going to find where his or her office is in both cases, and then they're going to have to run again in a primary in March.
And to add to that, they'll have absolutely no power. People do not understand the powerlessness that a freshman congressman has, and they got to turn right around and, as you say, go through it again. it becomes weary.
And Tamara, we understand that Robert Pittenger's talking about running for that seat once again.
That's what I understand as well.
Is that going to throw the whole dynamic up? I mean, if I'm Dan Bishop and I have a chance of winning this, does it bother me?
Well, I would think it would bother me, but it's going to make for a very interesting race where there will be lots of choices.
Well, we're going to be watching, obviously, in both instances to see the outcomes of them. And September 10th is the general election date for both. There will be a runoff in the 3rd district on July 9th. I want to shift gears while we're on this subject of politics. This past week, we saw the State Board of Elections fire Kim Strack, who was the executive director of the state board and had been for a number of years. Bob Cordell, the chair, says this was not a political decision.
Of course it was a political decision.
I was getting ready to say, and yet there was no other explanation given.
Well, the governor's been arguing ever since he was elected, but had not yet taken office, and the Republican legislature took actions to change how the Board of Elections would be constituted and so forth. The governor's been arguing explicitly for 2 years, this should be political, because I was elected by the voters. I should be the one who populates a majority of the Board of Elections, which is going to in turn hire who the majority wishes. I mean, then the governor said this week, well, I wasn't involved. He may not have issued some sort of writ on a back of a sheepskin or something, but obviously this is a political act.
Well, wait a minute. The governor's saying that you're saying that the governor said that the Board of Elections is political. He said that before. The the Republicans decided to make it political. They changed the rules. The Board of Elections was always controlled by the person who ran the governor's mansion until the Republicans ran the legislature and a Democrat got elected governor. Then they tried to take over the Board of Elections.
But they didn't take it over.
They tried to take it over several times.
But they proposed, and the voters didn't agree with it,
right.
But they proposed an equal division
their first
of our
proposal wasn't equal.
I agree.
They tried everything. First they tried to take it over. That didn't work. Then they tried to make it even with the voters. That didn't work. Then what the voters said was, we like it the way it's always been done, where the governor's office controls the majority of the Board of Elections. That's always the way it's been done.
But all of that having been said, the governor got the person he wanted. That's the outcome of this conflict.
It's also worth remembering when the Republicans took over the Board of Elections, guess what they did? They fired the executive director of the Board of Elections.
But does it hurt the governor's arguments, though, about what happened in those special elections back in 2016 before he came into office? And he was just decrying all of the politics that the legislature went through, and now he turns around and does the same thing. Does that hurt his whining or crying about it?
Well, it does a little bit, but there's nothing inherently wrong with saying that some jobs are just political. And this is one of them.
And he gets to put his person in.
And he gets to put his person in there, and it may seem unfair to the average citizen, but that's the way it is.
So, so far as it goes, this is a big boys game or a big girls game, whichever it may happen to be. You might as well just know you serve at the pleasure.
You do.
I've been there before. Well, our legislature has proclaimed with a loud and strong voice that they believe in school choice by lifting the cap on charter schools, by instituting a voucher program for students to attend private schools. Now, at first, this voucher was provided for low-wealth families, but the legislature is currently considering raising the income cap so that a family can earn more than $70,000 a year and take advantage of the vouchers. Tamara, you were in the legislature when this voucher program was started. What do you think of allowing a family of 4 making $70,000 a year to have vouchers?
Well, Tom, I have the distinct privilege of working in a classroom, a college classroom, with some of the best and brightest students, not just in our state, but in this country. And for every student that's in that classroom with me, there's 10, 15, or maybe 20 across the state that have not had the opportunity to develop their skills, to develop themselves to the point that they could do that. And it is our responsibility as government to provide families the opportunity to get their children, if they're trapped in these schools, trapped in unperforming, failing schools, to give them the opportunity to succeed.
Shouldn't a family earning $70,000 a year, though, be able to afford options?
No, I don't agree with that.
And is this $4,200 a year really going to make that much difference?
I think it will. I do. A family of 4 in urban North Carolina at $70,000 a year can barely make ends meet between housing, clothing, and food. There isn't any money left over, or if there is, there's only a margin of the money left over for private school.
Rufus, so far as it goes, I see the expression on your face, and I think I have an idea of where you're getting ready to come from here. But the vouchers are not even being used. I mean, we are allocating something like $144 million a year, and yet they're not all being taken. Why is that? Is it people?
It perplexes me. I think $70,000 is above the average
the median income in North Carolina is around 50.
And the theory was that this would make more people that make $70,000 a year have more of a way to access this fund and spread it around more. But for the life of me, I'm a public school guy, and I just don't know when this stuff is going to end. Where is the end to this? Next year, will it be 100,000? The next year, 150,000? That's the problem we have with a program like this.
Well, let me point out a couple of things. It's certainly the case that 70,000 is higher than the median household income in the state. That is, of course, could be two people making 35, which is the starting salary of a public school teacher. And so we can't poor mouth on the one hand and then rich mouth on the other hand if we're talking about roughly the same kinds of numbers. Also, the waiting list thing is a little convoluted. Part of the reason why they allocated more money than ended up being spent is because there was a mismatch between a cap on kindergarten and first grade and what was happening. If you've got two kids and one of them's in kindergarten and one is a third grade, you got a third grade voucher, but you can't get the kindergarten voucher because of the artificial cap, then you don't take either one.
Well, taking the caps off.
So they're going to take the cap off, and I think you'll end up filling those slots pretty easily.
I help but wonder, is this like trying to get a camel in a tent? First of all, you start by getting the nose under the tent.
I do think it. I think there are people who think we ought to.
Before long, we're going to be giving vouchers to everybody.
That's right.
Is that what's getting ready to happen?
Right. And there's another alternative, which is try to fix the low-performing schools by giving them more resources, by doing more for teachers and support personnel and all the other things. Also, by the way, we've talked about on this show about increasing accountability. The legislature is going the opposite way. They also want to take right now, if you have 25 voucher students, you have to file at least some kind of financial report with the state. That is being taken away at the same time we're raising this cap. And we are spending now hundreds of millions of dollars, literally, to teach children, I say this every week, that dinosaurs and children roam the earth at the same time.
You don't mean hundreds of millions.
Well, no, tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
So we have no control at all with our taxpayer money. We're teaching kids things that are scientifically wrong. So those kids are showing up in classrooms and they've been taught terrible things about science.
Many of those kids have been taught exactly the same thing since the mid-'90s. In daycare centers and preschools funded by the state, and no one complained about it.
But there's no obligation to go to pre-K. There's no constitutional right to
no obligation that you have to go to a private school.
There is obligation. You have to have a sound basic education in North Carolina.
You never have to go to a private school and learn about religious things if you don't want to.
Why am I paying for it? Why am I paying to teach
kids
something that is wrong?
Well, then why are you paying for Smart Start? That does the same thing.
So you're equating pre-K and public schools as the same thing?
The ultimate question I think the taxpayers of North Carolina ought to be asking is there any evidence that this voucher program is actually helping to improve education in our state? Tamara, in the legislature, did you ever see any factual evidence that this was helping? By the way, before you answer that, they actually did away with a report which was going to try to tell us that. They decided not to commission that report, but go ahead.
I'm part of a group called NCLF, and we're actually looking at that issue now. And yes, there is data that shows that when a family has the opportunity to make those choices to get a child out of a failing school, that child is going to do much better. And to the point that Chris made, you talk about wanting to increase the supports for teachers and for schools, and certainly that's important. But we've poured billions and billions and billions of dollars into our public school system.
We spend less per capita now than we did before the Great Recession.
But still, 13.
We have millions, hundreds of thousands of kids.
You were suggesting that you were contradicting the point she was making, and they're completely consistent. We spend huge amounts of money on education.
And if money would have fixed it alone, it would have been fixed long ago. There are $13 billion in public school money now in the budget.
Well, let's cut that to zero.
The old Sam Irvin's coming out of me. I have great problems with separation of church and state with a lot of this money. They go to pure religious schools, and I think our Constitution prohibits that.
Why can't we agree that there at least should be accountability? What other state program do we spend money in and don't evaluate? We were called for a study. We put that off. We're not having a study. We don't know what they teach. They're not required to tell us. They're not required to tell us actually even how they spend the money. What other program?
Tamara, is your group going to be addressing this? Because I think Chris raises a very legitimate
point. And I certainly support accountability. I think accountability is,
the problem is you can't use test scores because they don't all give the same tests. And mandating that these private schools give the inferior state test would be foolish.
How about mandating they give any test that everybody has?
They already do that. They already mandate
They don't have
the
to
tests.
report those scores.
That's a different question.
Well,
and how you would use them if there are all these different tests is a problem. Talk to the people
Just
who've
have
been
some
studying the issue.
accountability.
There is an alternative, which is to look at, for example, at parental and student evaluations, reviews that have the same instrument given in public and private schools, not a test but an evaluation. I think that's a good idea.
Tune in next week when we continue this same discussion on NC Spin. In the meantime, I want to switch topics here. North Carolina has the 6th largest death row population of any state in the nation, but we haven't actually executed anybody since 2006. A new poll shows that the majority of people in our state no longer support the death penalty. Chris, there was a time when we wanted to demonstrate we were tough on crime. Is it time now to kill the death penalty?
Well, it's been time. I mean, it really, I would have thought, and I think this contributed to it, the number of cases which are now in the hundreds across the country of people who have been on death row unjustly. We've had that happen in North Carolina. I bet you, I feel like there will be a case, if there haven't already been, where we've executed an innocent person. It does not deter crime. You can look at states with the death penalty, without the death penalty, judge their murder rates. It's an incredible waste of time. There's many arguments against the death penalty.
You were Attorney General. You supported the death penalty.
Certainly
Have you
did,
changed your position on it now?
Probably put more people on death penalty than any other Attorney General the 10 years I was Attorney General.
Is that in the book?
I have wrestled. I'm not sure. I have wrestled with this question for years, and I'm even on a committee of the national committee that's studying this system. If North Carolina did not have the Actual Innocence Commission, I would be for abolishing the death penalty.
Wait a minute. If we didn't
have the Actual Innocence Commission, I think that's the saving grace. And there's some crimes that are so absolutely awful that you have to reserve the death penalty for those.
All right, Tamara, the thinking was for many years that it was a deterrent for people committing heinous crimes, particularly capital crimes. Any evidence of that? I mean, the crime rate, the homicide rate has gone down in the state. Is that the factor for that?
Well, it would certainly take care of repeat offenders if we turn them loose, but I would like to comment on Rufus's point. I agree. For example, the Timothy McVeigh situation in Oklahoma City, it deserved the death penalty after due process. We have to have the death penalty for situations like that. So I also, with much trepidation, support the death penalty because there are times when that is the appropriate consequence for an action.
Let me flip a pro on this, John. We spend more money with people on death row because of appeals and all that goes along with it than it would cost to incarcerate them for the rest of their lives. Now, there was a time when they could get out, good behavior, so forth like that, could be paroled. We've now changed that so that you can't be paroled. If you're sentenced for life, you're going to do life. So does that justify eliminating the death penalty in your mind?
I do not believe that it is absolutely certain that parole in these situations is impossible. I know that it is not currently the law. I just don't quite buy that. And I think a lot of North Carolinians will give a different answer based upon whether you assume that life without parole is real or you're guaranteed
Chris,
that life
real
without
quick,
parole is real.
we've got some legislators now that want to resume executions. Right. What's the rationale?
I don't know. I mean, I think the rationale is that they're trying to play to their base and trying to be tough on crime. But with all due respect to Rufus, the Innocence Commission sometimes takes 20 years sometimes before a case comes to light. That's too long.
I got 2 minutes left in show. I'm going to ask each of you to tell us something we don't know. John Hood, start with you.
This is an election year, municipal election year, but in a lot of cities they will not have mayoral elections. Winston-Salem, Greensboro, Asheville, none of those are going to have them because of changes in the calendar. The only competitive big city race I'm aware of will be in Raleigh.
Oh, really?
Not
I thought Charlotte. Tamara, tell us something we don't know.
Cal Cunningham is going to drop out of the Democratic primary for lieutenant governor and is going to run for the United States Senate.
Interesting. Again, Tom, tell us.
I guess so.
You heard it here first.
Well, I want my money back then I gave last night.
Tell us something we don't know
Historic preservation is bipartisan, and a bill is running through the House and Senate now to preserve that historic preservation tax credit.
Oh, the tax credit. Okay. Minute left.
Minute left. I'll give you. We talked about how crowded the 3rd district was in the Republican primary. Eric Mansfield, former state senator, is looking at running for the U.S. Senate. Janet Cowell, former state treasurer, is looking at running for the Senate. Now Cal Cunningham. That will be that primary is getting as crowded as one of these congressional races.
We're going to have some fun come next year. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter. Give your feedback and read my weekly column. Be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com. or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And next week, our friend Brad Crone will be sitting in this chair. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Our state has more than 300,000 with no options for health insurance. 63% are in working families, one illness away from disaster. Let's create a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured.
To learn more, visit careforcarolina.com.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
Partners for Innovation in Healthcare. We're supporting common sense solutions for North Carolina's healthcare delivery system, promoting access, affordability, quality care, and innovation. Visit us on the web at pihc.info.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.